Hey y'all, how we doing? Shout out once again to Bear Nation for tuning in to another episode of the Bear Necessities podcast. I am your host, Rob Napoli. The Bear Necessities is a podcast where we sit down with entrepreneurs, ecosystem partners, and innovation folks to talk about what it takes and means to launch, create, and scale business across the world. We talk about the journey and the challenges of being entrepreneurial minded and how that translates into your journey, giving you the tools and knowledge to overcome challenges that you may be facing in your life's journey. The Bear Necessities is part of the Rise Up Media family, and we thank you for tuning in. Now, let's get into the show. Bear Nation, how we doing? We are back again with another episode of the Bear Necessities podcast. And today should be a really fun episode as I have a guest on who I met not too long ago through an organization I work out of called She Gets Shit Done with Alex Batdorf. I'm a mentor for that accelerator. It is a badass group of women entrepreneurs doing really amazing things. And so I had this opportunity to meet Kristen, and when we chatted, I just loved what she was building and loved her vibe. And it was like instant, like, I got to get you on the pod. We got to talk through this. Let's talk about your story. Kristen Carbone is committed to making the lives of the people around her more comfortable, fulfilling, and beautiful. She had a decade-long career working in curatorial departments and museums in the arts across New York and New England. And now she's founded Brilliantly, a platform dedicated to meeting the long-term quality of life issues faced by women who've had an experience with breast cancer. She is a writer, public speaker, and solutions finder. Kristen serves on the advisory council for Breasties as the member of Dreamers and Doers, the Fourth Floor, Female Founders Community, a lot of things. And in addition to her work at Brilliantly, she's an avid jigsaw puzzler, which we'll get into, a gardener, list maker, and she currently resides up in Providence, Rhode Island, where she lives with her 2 children and enjoys gardening, puzzling, and sharing meals with loved ones. So, Kristen, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. It was really interesting as I was running through that, and you have me all tongue-tied. I have to ask, how did you get it? Like, how did you fall in love with not just puzzling, jigsaw puzzling? Like, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, I think I was definitely pre-pandemic. I know a lot of people started doing puzzles at home, but one of my childhood friends moved in with me. Mm-hmm. It must have been back in 2016. She came for like a couple days and stayed for 2.5 years. And it was like and my kids were really little. And so we would do a lot of puzzles, like 1,000-piece puzzle a week for a really long time. And I found, and that was before I started Brilliantly. And there's something really meditative about it. I still like doing it. Like, I can't really think about something else while I'm doing it. And often I'll have like a good idea in those moments of like completely tuning out everything else.
I love that. I think it's important for all of us to find something that allows us to analyze, right? Where we work on something and kind of analyze and tune out. When I was a kid, for me, it was always, there's these, obviously Legos were big in my family, but we had these, like, they were called Connects, and they're these big orange tubs, right? Yeah. And you built like cars and stuff. Like, that was my, like, growing up. And so got to the point where I loved puzzles and do puzzles with my wife. And we actually have a huge jigsaw puzzle 3D model of Hogwarts Castle.
Oh, awesome.
So I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd. And then that was something we did, during the pandemic. And it took us I think it took us 2 days to complete it. But that was my first like true jigsaw puzzle that I've ever done. And I was like obsessed. So when I saw that, I had to ask about that. And I always love when hearing people talk about their Zen zone, their flow state, right? We deal with problems all day, and finding that flow state where we can just let our brains work in the background. Mm-hmm. So before we even get into Brilliantly, I want to talk a little bit about, you were in the curatorial department for museums in the art world. Talk to me about, where did your passion for art come from? And what was that experience like being in the art world for 10 plus years, I guess?
Yeah. I don't know when I decided I wanted to go to school for art history, but I knew in high school that that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved making art. And I think I probably used to be a little bit fearful about like, what would that mean as a career? I didn't know many artists who were practicing artists who had any stability in a way that I was like, now I don't care about. But I think as a kid, I was like, I don't know, how do you become a grown-up and be an artist? And art history seemed, sort of adjacent to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only person I know who loved the intro to art history, like that survey class that most artists get forced to take and hate. I loved sort of learning about history through art and through making and through visual culture and kind of moving through the world and seeing things in a different way. I worked at 3 different museums. I do miss it. In all of those positions, I was focused on contemporary artists, which is not what I actually studied. And working with live artists is so fun and interesting, and sometimes really challenging within the confines of an institution. And I think I did get a little frustrated with that. And there was a moment, it's not in my bio, I spent some time working with a group of artists as a public artist. And part of that practice was also doing arts-based leadership training. So when you were talking about that flow state, I was thinking about an activity we used to do. We would go into GE's Crotonville. I don't know if you know about Crotonville. It's basically, it's like a college campus for GE executives. It's right outside New York. And we would go and make them make things together. It was super fun. But one of the activities was about drawing the place. And this was like life-size scale drawings out of like painter's tape on a wall at GE, where you would draw, like, where do you have your best ideas? And it was about sort of tapping into that flow state and how do you make space for yourself to become more creative and improve your process. So I loved that you touched on that.
Yeah.
And I think having those sort of different experiences from like arts to working with executives all primed me for being able to start brilliantly.
That's amazing. And, it's funny that you talk about that intro to art history class, because I don't know if you watch New Girl at all.
No.
Okay. So the reference won't work. But there's a joke where she goes back to school and is in art history, and it's just like a really funny thing because it's like boring. And she's got 2 friends like, you need to get into hospitality management. And the guy's like, please tell me about hospitality, more of like the teacher is doing it. It's like a really funny thing. But excuse me, it's kind of funny because I had a similar, like when I went to school, I wanted to be a history teacher until I realized there's like no money in history teaching.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to school. I went to college. I went for business. I went for all these different things. I went for athletic training. And then I realized that's not what I wanted, and realized that I took a class, intro to marketing, and fell in love because of a show called Mad Men. And, pre-show, Kristen and I were talking about, she's taking a class on marketing so that she can be better acquitted to that, so she can actually like hire people in to help bring and run her marketing department. And I was like, yeah, marketing is actually pretty boring. I love marketing. Like, it's what I do, but it's actually pretty boring. The cool, sexy stuff was advertising. And I didn't realize there was 2 different parts of it. So I was like going from marketing, thinking I was going to be in advertising, and it never worked out. So, it's funny because life happens uniquely. And I love the fact that you have we have a lot of founders that don't walk a linear path, that you can do something for a number of years and take those experiences and build upon them, because all those things that you learn and kind of working into that set you up to be where you are today. So talk about it. What was the kind of impetus, or what was the thing that happened, or the reason that you're kind of like finally like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to start a company. Like, I'm going to leave what I've been doing for the last however many years, decade-long career, and start something. What was that like? Or was there a moment? Was it over time? Totally. Was it a feeling? What was that for you?
I was reading something I wrote a long time ago yesterday, and it said, people don't quit jobs, people quit bosses. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I remember when I wrote that. And I wrote it because I was working for this guy who was just such an asshole. And it was a really small company, and he was visionary and difficult and a really interesting person, but just kind of the worst to work for.
Yeah.
And I had this moment where I was like, if this guy can do this, I can do this. And I've always wanted to work for myself. I've always wanted to start my own thing. And I never knew what that was going to be. I have a few friends who are like the people where when I have an idea, I like text them or call them and they're like, that one's stupid. Like, you know, and sometimes it's people who are in marketing and advertising actually who will like look up the market size and be like, not good enough, not big enough. Call it, you know, like, and brilliantly started really because I was just trying to solve a problem for myself. And I think that's common for entrepreneurs. I wasn't like, oh, I have an idea for an app that everybody can use. I was like, I'm uncomfortable and how can I feel better? And that started, I had a preventative mastectomy in 2013 because of my hereditary breast cancer risk. And I spent years dealing with the side effects, emotional and physical, from going through that process and never complaining about it. I felt like I chose this thing and I would just have to deal with what that meant and the difference in my identity. And I didn't have to suffer and ultimately die like my mother did. So shut up, live your life, and don't complain. But one of the really strange outcomes was that I felt cold all the time. And my close friends knew that because they were with me. And I was like, there's a picture in the pitch deck of me at the beach and like everybody else is in bathing suits and I'm in a sweatshirt and a hat and I'm wrapped in a towel. And my friend took that photo long before Brilliantly was even an idea because she was just couldn't get over it. Like my teeth were chattering and we were at the beach and it's because I had gone in the water and couldn't get warm again. When you have implant reconstruction and there's no breast tissue insulating them, they just act like a heat sink. And it wasn't until 4 years after I had surgery that a friend of mine was like, let's try to make you something. And that's what started the whole thing. And neither of us were engineers. So we made, I guess, what is called a proof of concept design. I've learned since then that was what I wanted, which is it was something that warmed up and it fit into all of my bras, but it was hooked to a huge drill battery. So there was this, we were just talking about cords. And cords are cool for some things, but they're not necessarily cool coming out of your shirt to a drill battery. And over the summer of 2017, when I realized like I can't make something for me to wear that is discreet and safe without help, and there's no point in making it unless other women need it, I joined Instagram and Facebook groups and started talking to anyone who had talked to me in the breast cancer community to find out if they were also cold. But those conversations were so much more genuine about their experience and what happened in their life as a result of either having a preventative mastectomy or going through a breast cancer diagnosis. And that was really the moment where I thought, I can't just make a product. We have to do more than that. We have to help with these long-term quality of life issues that you're not talking to your oncologist or breast surgeon about, like sex, relationships, talking to your kids about cancer, finding clothes that you feel good in. So in tandem with product development, we've been doing a lot of content creation and collaborations in the breast cancer space.
You know, I appreciate you sharing that story. And it's something that I think is really important to share is that a lot of these things, you know, there's a lot of companies and products and services out there that are solving a perceived pain or something that we think is a pain or being derivative of one step faster, right? And then you have the companies like this that are built out of real experiences that you realize that there's bigger things at play. And you know, it's really easy to say, you know, you made that choice, you know, you're not going to die from it, you're going to live with it. Like, it's easy to think that. And I think we kind of push that of like, we should be happy and thankful. And we should be happy and thankful. That doesn't mean that we don't need safe spaces to build communities around these things. And the more and more that I've grown up and gotten older and, you know, meeting people, like I've had two members of my family had breast cancer, had it removed, went through the whole process. You realize it's much more common than you think. And so there's a lot of people out there that walk with having these experiences or these fears. And I think I have somebody very close to me that has ALS in their family and they're not sure if they're a carrier or not. And it's a big deal for them and it weighs them down. And there needs to be a safe space to be able to talk about these things and just bond. Doesn't mean that you're not thankful for something. It doesn't mean that you're not excited to move forward, but it means that shit happens and shit is tough and life gets hard, and you need those communities, products, and places to be able to be a fucking human and have humans be back. And so I love that you've created Brilliantly. I think that's a brilliant idea of putting in place not only products, but services, community, and the whole thing. So I that was something that I remembered when we talked that first moment. I was like, I love this idea. I love this connection because it's a full picture, not just one little thing.
Yeah.
And also I know that, you know, I love that you're unapologetically you share your story, and it's a big deal because it's what we invest in. We invest in each other and we want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Anyone who's having any kind of experience, whether it's a happy, like becoming a parent, or like every single moment of change in your life requires you to have a space and a group of people who understand what you're going through.
Yeah. I mean, even when things look good and we're happy with things, like there's still stresses of life and things that we need to be able to talk with people who understand. Right. Yeah. And, you know, that's something that I've become a lot more self-aware of, is I'm always like, yeah, you know, I'm sorry to hear that. I can only imagine. And I used to say it out of like being nice, but now it's more like, hey, like, I appreciate you sharing with me. I don't know. I can't even imagine, and I don't know what I could do other than listen. And I'm happy to listen. And if you want me to provide some context, I'm happy to provide context, but I'll shut up. Like, you tell me what you need to tell me, and I'm not going to be able to understand, but I'm going to be here to listen. And ever since I kind of started doing that, like that's changed my whole perspective on how I communicate with people. Yeah. And it's really easy for us to be like, oh yeah, I had this one experience that's completely unrelated, so I know how you're feeling. And we get into this like back and forth, and we don't hear each other. So what, oh, this is snowballing me into so many questions. What do you think makes Brilliantly, you know, when you set out to, you know, answer these questions with Brilliantly, and, you know, you had the idea for the product, it had the big drill battery, and you've innovated that. But when you started realizing all these other things around the community, the services, having a platform, like where did you start going into, and how have you been able to kind of manage the original product idea into kind of what has happened with secondary and tertiary things that have become a big part of what Brilliantly is? Like, how have you been able to manage that as a first-time entrepreneur going through all this and trying to build this and figure this out on the fly?
Yeah, I love that question. And it honestly goes back to working in the arts. The very first project I did out of college at the Albright Knox in Buffalo, which like has my heart, such an amazing museum and group of people. They had always done a regional biennial of local artists. And when I started my first year there, I was 21. I had just graduated from college. They decided to expand that exhibition to every nonprofit art organization in Western New York and have it be an open call to artists who live in basically a 2-hour radius of the city of Buffalo. That was my first job. And it was pre-digital, which now everyone knows how old I am. But everyone was submitting. We had 711 artists submit materials, and it was with slides and CDs. It was a massive amount of physical stuff. It was 11 arts organizations and 14 curators, 2 directors, and a book. The process of like organizing all of those studio visits, it was massive. It was a massive undertaking. And I think I learned how to zoom out when I needed to zoom out and see the whole thing and what needed to happen to keep all of the things incrementally moving forward. And when was it time to like dive down? And I've been able to use that. Almost every project I've worked on since has been a bear, if we're going to be on brand here. Just really multifaceted, complicated, collaborative, tons of people. And I've brought that sort of aesthetic and operational way of existing to Brilliantly. And it has been so rewarding because there are moments when I'm like, you know what I can't do is read the specs for the product anymore today. So I'm going to do an interview with a woman, or I'm going to write a new blog post, or I'm going to plan the social media for the next month, or I'm just going to answer the 400 emails that are sitting in my inbox. And having all of those different things allows me to not get bored, for lack of a really genuine answer, because there's always something interesting happening. And sometimes I want to work solo, and sometimes I'm like, oh, guess what? I'm going to call Rob, and we're going to have that conversation we need to have and work on this problem. So the product thankfully has a lot of really wonderful, like excited, interested engineers working on it. Yep. Who will call me sometimes and be like, oh, my daughter is using it for period cramps, or I have my dad, it's wrapped around his knee because he had a knee replacement and his knee hurts today. Like, they're iterating, they're thinking about it, they're informing me about what it could and should be. And then, the women in the community are a constant for me. There is never a moment that I don't want to talk to someone. Anytime I get an email or a DM, I will almost stop time to engage with somebody from the brilliant community.
I love that. I think one of the things that I do, and a good friend of mine who I'm thankful to call him a friend, we met during the pandemic and he came and did some stuff for one of the programs I was running. We just connected. Larry Long Jr. He talks about, he got it from somewhere else, but it was like a 3-minute challenge, and take 3 minutes of your week to reach out to somebody in your network and just say, hey, how are you doing? Like send them a GIF or something like that. And I kind of expand on that, where I take 5 people in my network and I get on video and I just shoot them a 30, 60-second video. How you doing? What's up? Blah, blah, blah. And just send it out to like engage in conversation, or use LinkedIn voice notes just to kind of talk to my network, because sometimes the shit gets hard. Like, I'm doing all these different things and running my business. And like you, it's like, there's always something cool to do. And there's always great conversations to be had that spark ideas and things. Sometimes you just need to do that and kind of step away from what you're building to have genuine, authentic conversations that help reinvigorate you back into your business and reinforce why you're doing it and the impact you want to create and make.
I love that. I used to, every Monday morning for years, I would write 2 thank you notes. Like, and it didn't have to be like, thank you for the gift. It was just like a thank you note and also a letter to my grandpa, who has since passed away. But it was such a good practice for me to like start my week thinking about what I was grateful for. And that is not, I've not maintained that. I've probably since having children, but I love the idea of it being just like a little voice recording, like that it could be something simpler.
Yeah. It's a great way, either text or like a LinkedIn voice note. And it's something I've seen some other people do and talking about it. And it's just been very fulfilling for me. And it's also a great way to keep your network warm and have those good conversations. So one of the things that, I've really loved about watching your journey and see this thing go is that you took the time and energy to put yourself into a lot of positions to grow as an entrepreneur. You went through the day 1 program. You went through the 4th floor program, which trying to drive these things. You did the Get Shit Done Accelerator, where we met with Alex Batdorf. Shout out, Alex. Dreamers and Doers. So as you're kind of like building this company, you leave the art world, you're building brilliantly, and then you start going into all these kind of accelerator programs and programs to learn and grow. What was that like, and what was the impact that had on you as an entrepreneur by seeking out and doing these programs?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be like, I would literally describe myself as someone who didn't join anything. Like, the reason I picked Skidmore College was because they didn't have a football team. I was like, they didn't have Greek life. I was like, no, I want none. I want no community. And I realized that that's impossible, actually, to continue my own growth. The very first day, I left my day job on a Friday after like working a job and trying to work on brilliantly, like before work, after work. Quit the job. That first Monday, I came to New York and did a program with this guy named Bruce. And it was like, there were 3 other entrepreneurs who were there. And it was about like articulating your mission and all these things. And I met this woman there named Cindy Spiegel, who's just awesome. And she was building a community. And I was like, she's ahead of me. I'm going to join her community. I'm going to see how she does it. I'm going to understand it. And she's just so fucking awesome. Like, I literally in this workshop was like, can we be friends? Like, I don't think I ever like asked somebody to be my friend until that moment. And joining her program was the first step in me understanding the extreme value of surrounding myself with like-minded people who were trying to do more. From that, I went to Dreamers and Doers, and they kept piggybacking. The opportunities kept revealing themselves. It's allowed me to find investors, advisors, accountability partners, PR opportunities, meeting people like you. It just, I had this core network of people who were amazing, and it's like a ripple effect in the pond. I just continued to expand the people that I have access to, the amazing people that those people have access to. And I've learned more in the last 4.5 years than in any, like, I joke sometimes that my brain feels saturated. I don't know how to make space for more. And then it's like, oh, I also want to learn about this thing, and you just keep going.
Yeah. I love it. And I think, I mentor or coach an entrepreneur residents for 12 different global accelerators, and I meet amazing people and go through these programs. I'm a part of like 20 different Slack groups, and I've had to start backing out of part of the communities that I'm in, because everyone these days is trying to build community. It can be overwhelming, but when you find the right opportunities like that you can kind of grow into and manage that, it becomes an amazing X factor in your business. But have you ever gotten to a point where you're like, just done, exhausted? Have you hit that point of like, you said it, you always find space for more, but have you ever hit that wall of just like, fuck, I can't take this anymore, I need to take a break? And what was that experience for you like?
Well, you mentioned Slack, right? And anyone who's listening to this probably has a Slack experience. It's constant. It was constant. And during the pandemic, every group was like, we want to help you. We want to figure this out. Let's figure this out together. I probably also 20 Slack groups. And I think it was the fall of 2020. I was like, my gift to myself is I'm signing out of Slack. I'm deleting it from my computer. And if I get an app and it comes through my email and it's like to me and not the whole channel, I will go in and I will find it and I will connect with that person. But it was impossible to keep up with. And that doesn't mean it wasn't awesome. It just was like, it created this feeling of like ever-present FOMO, where I'm like, oh God, I didn't see what Rob's post was. I didn't see what this person did. Maybe I missed this thing that I could have applied for. And I was like, don't need it. Like, that doesn't have to be the way that I engage with people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's so many different ways to create community, and everyone, especially during the pandemic, everyone was creating a community. Yeah. And it was great and we needed it, but it was overwhelming. And I think the key thing here is that it's okay to turn off those notifications for a while. It's okay to kind of take a step back from certain things. You can still create those connection paths and have those, but don't feel like you always have to be on for everybody all the time, and know when to step back and just be yourself and like do a jigsaw puzzle and get into a flow state and just process information. You had this cool experience that you posted about. You got to pitch to Kevin O'Leary. Tell me a little bit about that experience of like, for those listening that don't know, Kevin O'Leary is a huge personality, SharkTank investor, big kind of personality. And it's intimidating to do. So tell me about that experience a little bit. And were you intimidated, or what was that like to like do that? And once you were done, how did you feel?
I love that you're asking about that. It was such a funny experience. When the first thing I did when I decided I was going to actually start brilliantly was I made a list of things that I'm not good at, and a list of the people who I knew who were good at those ththings. And I didn't know anything about finance. And my friend Dave is gifted. And I called Dave and I was like, hey, I'm going to start a business. Can we meet for coffee? Can I tell you what I'm going to do? So I tell him my idea, and I'm like, and I'm professionally proposing to you now. Would you help me? And he looked at me and he goes, I'll help you. And I'm going to teach you how to do this yourself, so you don't need me, and you're not allowed to cry. And I was like, okay. And he said, the first thing I want you to do is watch Shark Tank. And I was like, okay. So I watched an episode of Shark Tank and was like, oh God, this is horrible. I cannot watch this. And I watched one episode of Shark Tank, decided, didn't like it, never was going to watch it, haven't watched it since. I got invited to this pitch, which was through an organization called Eureka Health. And they were doing this like awareness thing during Breast Cancer Awareness Month for a nonprofit called the Tutu Project. And the way that it worked, people could register and watch a pitch practice with Kevin O'Leary. So there was 3 female founders who were invited to do a very friendly, and I know you've seen the video, so he was very nice to me. It was not very Shark Tank like. We were invited to pitch Kevin. We had 3 minutes, 10 slides, whatever it was. And the woman who organized it, her name's Marcella, and I called her and I was like, I'm a little scared of him. I've only seen him do one thing. I just watched a couple of videos of him on YouTube, and I don't love how he talks to people. And I said, I've had enough experiences, like medical experiences, being a woman trying to start a business, like pick a thing, where people talk to me in this way, and I don't feel great about putting myself in that situation. And she was like, Kristen, he's so nice. He's shockingly nice, actually. And I was like, all right, I'm going to believe you. And it was so fun. And it honestly, like, he's such a smart man. And I can't tell you how many people who, and not to be gendered about this, but men who don't get it. And it's a really hard problem to understand. Mm-hmm. He immediately understood. He immediately saw the extended market opportunity. He asked awesome questions. And I've been like tweeting at him ever since. And I'm waiting to hear back. Actually, I had this same woman gave me a hint that he was going to email me this week. So I almost just checked my emails, like, maybe Rob is going to manifest this for me. But, it was really fun. And he's such a wonderful, kind, smart man.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really funny because Shark Tank is a really interesting show that they just figured out a really cool way to make this like thing that happens intense that it's like watchable television. Like my first like meeting in New York, I sat down, I thought it was a coffee meeting and I had ended up pitching and I had nothing ready. And I was like, the guy told me to leave after like 5 minutes. Like that happened. Like it was kind of messed up. And it was before I like really got good at pitching. And it was like that moment I was like, all right, I got to learn how to pitch and pitch well if I'm going to make New York and try to go raise funds. But I think what we forget is that a lot of times what we see on TV is a personality for a show versus like who the human is. And so that's really cool that you had that question and you talked to her and she was like, hey, do this, I promise. And it turned out to be an amazing experience. And yeah, it was a great video. It's super cool to watch. And also just a great experience to have, you know, something at that caliber, do something like that and provide great feedback, ask great questions and kind of help validate what you're doing in a way that, you know, just kind of puts some validity to it. I mean, I always joke like, you know, I can give you some validity and like, yeah, I have some experience in the space, but at what cost, right? You need to continue to validate against different personalities and thoughts and people with different backgrounds at different levels so that you can see the value chain up and down the line because everyone has different views of the market. And so I think it's just it was a really cool video. If you know, go to Kristen's LinkedIn, it's on her featured page, check it out. It's super cool, super fun. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
Pitching the company and the product. And I loved it. So I wanted to bring it up because Kevin is just, you know, he's a big personality. I follow him on TikTok and on Instagram. So I was like, yeah, I have to ask about that experience. Yeah,
pitching is, I mean, to your point, like anyone who's listening who's pitched has had a terrible pitch experience. I was just guest lecturing at a class at Providence College, like an entrepreneurial studies class. And I was clicking through my slide presentation. And when I started talking about fundraising and pitching, the slide was like the cover of one of Kesha's albums and a picture of McDonald's French fries. And I was like, because I would leave and I would need to hear the F word a lot and eat fries because it was just learning how to do it is so stressful. And it was like, you need a release. Like, it wasn't like I was beating myself up over not being good at it, but it takes a long time to really hone that skill.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's not natural, right? And it's scary. So, you know, as we kind of round out this conversation, and I know we could talk forever, what is one thing that scares you about entrepreneurship and what you're building and doing?
It's such a good question. I think that like actual success, like not knowing the next thing is a little scary. I love control. I'm totally type A, and I've been trying to like take a 12-step program to be less type A, but you can't see what's going to happen next. My business is completely different because of the pandemic. I know a lot of people can say that. You can't foresee all kinds of things that are going to happen that are going to change what you have to do. And I can use every ounce of my brain power and energy to make a plan that I think is like a beautiful, great strategic plan that advisors and investors and everybody's psyched about. And then something can happen and it all changes. And knowing that I have to always have sort of the tools in my toolkit to be emotionally well through all of those changes and to grow out plants sometimes that took a long time to craft is hard. But it's scary. It's a great question.
Now, I always like to ask that question because there's always a bunch of different answers, but I think it's really important that we know what our fear is and do one thing that scares us every day to kind of step through overcoming that and make things happen, because it's really hard to put these big, and I've talked about this in multiple other podcast things, that I'm not a big fan of like big goal setting, right? And just by nature of it, I think, we kind of set ourselves up for these big lofty goals, and as soon as we fall off, it's just like we lose it. And my thought is like, you put a marker in the sand, right? You plant that flag, and that might take you 1 month, 6 months. It might take you a year, and you might go backwards. And you know what? You can always pick up that flag and move it up a little bit, move it back to make it easier, or move it out if it seems too easy. And that we need to start looking at it as fluidity and how we go attack what we want to take that next step, and that planting that next flag as we kind of climb that mountain. And if we start looking at it as more fluid, we can kind of determine what our success and leverage like success and fear in a way that's not, well, I plan on doing this thing and I've not done it for 2 weeks. So I'm just going to give up on it because it seems too lofty of a goal to hit. And so that's why I always like to ask that question and see people's answer.
It's a good one.
It's really interesting to see what people are afraid of in their businesses. So I've loved this conversation so much, Kristen. It's been so much fun. When we think about entrepreneurship and you having gone through a career, your first part of your career, and then completely transitioning to start a business, if somebody was, asking for your advice about entrepreneurship, what would you give somebody who's an entrepreneurial minded or wanting to be an entrepreneur? What'd you tell them?
Yeah, I think, honestly, and I touched on this a little bit, like find your people, find your community, join things, have accountability partners. It's so critical. If you are making your own company and in charge of all of your own time, it can feel like you're untethered. Like I used to send an email every week that was like, this is what I did this week. This is what I'm doing next week, like to a handful of advisors. And now it's the investor update email, you just need people to know what you're doing. You need a virtual high five. You need that email that's like, great job. Oh, this reminded me, I should introduce you to this person. Mm-hmm. Like find your people, get accountability partners that are like, that will push you and also that will support you and hug you when things are hard. Like cheerleaders and critics, have both. And that can be through professional organizations or something people do on their own, but it's critical.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to use a little shameless plug, but in my book, I talk about this a lot in The Social Soul, about mastering personal professional brand. It's about, one of the biggest things for anybody to do right now and start today, if you haven't done it before, start today, is build what I call a value-added network. Find people that support you, that you can learn from, that you can work with, all these things, and go connect with them. Get them in your community. Start learning from them, connecting and engaging with them. Because when you do that, you create these accountability loops and you learn to grow in a way that's very organic and natural. And the other thing I always talk about is have a personal board of advisors, right? They don't have to be anything formal. I have 100 people on a brand amplifiers list that I can reach out to at any given time, and that's always fluid. And I have a small personal board of advisors, so people that if something happens and I need to give a call to or an email, I send it to them and they're always going to give me feedback. And they're there for me in a way that, not many people are. And half my board of advisors, I've never met in real life. I've met them in the last couple of years in a virtual world and just connected with them and never met them in person. And they're people I can share a lot with about challenges about being a solopreneur. Yeah. So that's awesome. I love that. One of my favorite questions to ask everybody, what is your superpower, Kristen?
I'm scrappy. And I think it's something that I joke about, but, before we jumped on the podcast, you were talking about maybe going to school for history. I went for art history. I've worked in nonprofits. I had never made any money. And I'm really good at living on nothing. I'm really good at making something with like limited resources, limited time, that all of those things don't feel like obstacles to me. I'm like, oh, there's not time. Let's figure out how to do it quicker. Oh, there's not enough money. There's definitely going to be a workaround. And it's allowed me to bring a product to market for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than like the average. I've gotten people to donate time, and sometimes that's in kind. I'm doing something back for them. But I think figuring out ways to achieve whatever success is or how you see value or whatever you're trying to reach for, there are ways to do it that aren't just about dishing out dollars or dedicating an enormous amount of time.
Love that. It's funny, outside of, plugging my book to read, we talked about marketing earlier, right? We talked about pre-show about this, and there's a book by Nick Westergaard. He runs Brand Driven Digital and is a adjunct professor at University of Iowa. And he wrote a book called Get Scrappy about digital marketing. It's about how to do things with less. So it might be a really interesting book that would, I think, not only tap into your superpower, but also help with the stuff you're learning about marketing. And it's a great read. It's one of the ones I read early in my career. And I was like, this is, I'm the same way. I've always worked with very little resources. And it's like, how do you make things happen? So I love that. On the topic of books, what's a book, resource, show that you would recommend, entrepreneurs read or tune into?
Yeah. I was listening to a webinar the other day where the presenter was saying that first-time entrepreneurs focused really a ton on their product, and serial entrepreneurs focus on their channels, their distribution channels, their sales channels, how they're going to get the product out into the world, and focus more on the business than the product. And I was like, I'm falling into that pitfall. And I think that since going through Alex's Get Shit Done program, one of the books we read, and I actually had read it before the program, is called Traction. And I listened to it on audiobook, and the guy is amazing. He's like totally an engineer. Like, he is not a voice actor. It's really authentic in the best way possible. But it helped say, like, you probably haven't thought of all of the different traction channels that are relevant to you. And here are some of them, and here's ways you can approach it in like a simple, and I was like, oh, duh. It was such a light bulb moment. And I think hearing it again and again, like, you might be so passionate about your mission and your vision and the community that you're building and maybe the product that you're building or the service that you provide. But if you don't know how to get it out there to people, you don't really have a business. And that was, if you build it, they will come things, total bullshit. And I think it took me a long time to realize that. And this book, if you're just starting out, is so helpful because then you'll be thinking about all of those different possible ways to reach your people right from the get-go.
I absolutely love that. And it's one that I've not read, but I'm going to have to read. And it's the pitfall I see. I work with tons of entrepreneurs all the time, and I can't tell you how many of them come to me and they're only product focused and they know that their market size is 5 billion and all these things. I'm like, I don't fucking care. You're saying it's 5 billion because it probably is. 1, 2, that it has to be 5 billion or more for an investor to look at it.
Right.
But just because you're going to, go and, tap into 0.5% or 1% of the market or 5% and be a multi-million, billion-dollar industry, just because your product's better, no, like, that's not going to happen. If no one knows about you, it doesn't matter. Right. If a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? Does it make it sound? Right. And it's so hard to get that mindset shift that as you're going, it's really easy to be so bought into your product and your mission that you forget to talk to your customers. You forget to ask people what they think, where they should find you, how they found you, where they want to be seeing you, and really thinking, what are those channels that I should be connecting on?
Yeah.
And, going back to this personal, professional brand, you don't need to be on every platform. What platform makes sense for your business? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Instagram? Is it Twitter? Is it Facebook? Is it whatever? Don't try to be on all. Pick 1 or 2 that are right for you and go create and engage in that space, because that's where your customers are. That's where that traction channel happens. That's where those conversations happen. I can't harp on that enough. I love that you share that, is that you got to focus on the product, have a good product, but you need to be talking to the market and getting consistent feedback loops all the time. Because if you don't have a good plan of attack to go to market and get traction, you're not going to just organically acquire 1% because the market's so big. There's too much competition out there for that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, big tangent there, but I love that topic. And it's something I'm so passionate because I see it happen too many times to founders. Yeah. What's kind of a lasting message that you want listeners to take away about your story and your background and what you're building and kind of, a good cap to this episode?
Yeah, I think I would just encourage anyone who's a little bit afraid of starting their own thing because they didn't go to business school or they don't know about marketing or they're 40, there's no reason to not try. And that, all of your experience professionally, personally will weigh in a positive way whenever and whatever you're starting. And there's no reason to not give it a whirl. I just think so many of the most interesting founders are people who came from like the craziest backgrounds, some of whom are like in their 50s and doing it for the first time and just crushing it. And I think there's this idea that we hear that it's like, I either bootstrapped or I got VC funding. I'm either 22 or I'm whatever, like it's so binary. And I think it's really in that middle gray space that the coolest stuff happens.
Absolutely. Right. Is that great ideas come from anywhere and everywhere. And sometimes it's those that think outside the box that really make things happen. And when you focus on doing something that you're passionate about and you just go after it and you think about it differently, you don't need, I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, we don't need more Harvard Business School, Ross Business School founders out there. There's plenty of those. And yes, those programs are great and you learn a lot and you come out and do great things, but we need more creative thinkers and people who go through life experiences and build stuff because they want to figure it out. And they go think about ways to be unique and different and leverage non-traditional backgrounds into being scrappy problem solvers that create, went to solve one problem and created a whole platform that's created a community for the larger market that can happen. So I love that. I think that's a great cap to the episode. Where can Bear Nation find you? How do they get in touch with you? Follow along, learn more, all those good things.
Totally. So I'm very active on LinkedIn as me, Kristen. We have a pretty robust Instagram community for brilliantly.co. Anyone, I would be delighted to talk to your listeners. I'm at Kristen@brilliantly.co. People can reach out anytime. Love to have conversations with people who have questions or other entrepreneurs. And if people want to know more about the product, they can head to our website, brilliantly.co. If you are compelled to buy it and you want a little discount, special one for you, welcome 10, we'll get you 10% off. And just super excited to hear from your listeners, and thanks for having me today.
You bet. I'll make sure to link in the show notes your LinkedIn, the company, the Instagram, your email so people can get in touch with you, and the code welcome10, get you 10% off if you are interested in trying Brilliantly Warm. So Kristen, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to continue to follow your journey. I know that you posted that you partnered up on doing a masterclass for her brand co and doing some really cool stuff outside of Brilliantly. And, I think it's going to be amazing to see how you continue to engage with the breast cancer community and really, start some of these things that we talked about offline on problem solving with nursing moms and menstruating women and building us into a bigger product line. So I'm going to be a huge advocate following along. Thank you so much for being here, Kristen. I appreciate you for being a part of Bear Nation and just sharing your journey with us today. It's really awesome and great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You bet. Bear Nation, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay well, rise up. Bear Nation, once again, thank you for tuning in and listening to the Bare Necessities podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review. It really does help and means a lot to us at the show. And I want to thank our friends over at Fin. Fin is a social good platform that creates employee engagement and builds culture. It's our mission to support and give back to the communities that we serve around the world. And we do this by giving every guest on our show a $10 donation to the cause of their choosing using the Fin platform. Until next time, thank y'all, stay well, and rise up.